Hi, this is Adam Elio Berkowitz from Israel 365 News coming at you live from the Golan. We have an amazing guest today, and I can't emphasize how important it is to hear what Daniel Luria has to say. Daniel Luria is the executive director of Ataret Kohanim, and I have never, in my career in media, I have never seen as much fake news as I've seen about Ataret Kohanim. It's so important to hear directly from Daniel what his organization is doing. What they're doing is important, and there's so many lies printed about what he does, and that's why I'm so happy to have him. Daniel, the reason why we're speaking to you today is Ataret Kohanim is involved in establishing a Jewish majority in Jerusalem, in areas of Jerusalem where there currently is not a Jewish majority. And there was recently a story about a house that used to belong to Haj Alamin Husseini, the horribly anti-Semitic Mufti of Jerusalem, who actually worked with the Nazis. The house is in a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, and it has an amazing history. Could you tell us a little bit about what's happening with this house?
Yeah, with pleasure. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me on your news segment, your show. First of all, Ataret Kohanim is interested in strengthening Jewish roots in the heart of Jerusalem. As you know, and as everyone realizes, there's a major battle going over the Holy Basin specifically. Most of East Jerusalem is already in Jewish hands. There are 215,000 Jews living in huge neighborhoods. It's not an issue anymore. The world is churning water if they think that Jerusalem can be divided. But the Holy Basin, which is the most important area for the Jewish people, there's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done there. And for 40 years, we've been trying to strengthen Jewish roots and add Jewish life to the old city and the area around. Today, there's 1,000 Jews living in what's today called, I believe, the Muslim Quarter, but it's the old Jewish Quarter. There's a Jewish neighborhood on the Mount of Olives of over 100 families. We're talking 20 families living in an old Yemenite village, 85 families in the city of David. So the battle is really over that area. And one of the areas within the Holy Basin is the Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood that the correctly referred to as the Sheikh Jarrah area. And probably the most significant building in the area, and it's on a main road that goes from the center of town to Mount Scopus, where unfortunately there were 78 doctors and nurses massacred actually by Arabs in 1948. So that's another symbolism behind that. But this building was owned by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. I don't know how many of your readers know, but the property that we're talking about was owned by him. And he is really the symbol, as you pointed out, of the genocide and the wiping out of Jewry, not just in Palestine, where he was responsible for the murder of thousands of moderate Arabs and Jews, but also responsible for wiping out Yugoslavian Jewry. He established the only Nazi SS unit made up of Muslims. He sat with Hitler and Himmler in 41. The final solution, the things that he's involved, it's just phenomenal. So to know that his house today was bought by Jewish concerns many years ago, and that there's going to be Jewish life in that area because permission was given to build 28 units. You see, in addition to his house, there was a hotel that was attached to the house after he ended up leaving, and it was called the Shepherd's Hotel, later to be known as Malon Shefer or the Shefer Hotel. And today, of course, it's been demolished. His house was kept. There was an argument whether it should be taken and scattered over the ocean of the Mediterranean Sea, or whether it should be kept and turned into a synagogue where Jewish kids are going to be running around. And that was the ultimate decision, that his actual residence, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin El Husseini, that his residence is going to be the center of Jewish life for this neighborhood. There's a picture that all of your watchers can see now where he's sitting with Hitler in 1948, November 48, before the final solution. The last thing that he wanted was Jews to be sent over to Palestine. They had arrangements what to do with the Jews of Palestine. They had arrangements about everything. He was not just chummy, he was on their pay. He was being paid by the Nazis. And I mentioned about Yugoslavian Jewry. So the symbolism behind having Jewish life in that property is unparalleled.
If I can add, not only was he so like in bed with the Nazis, and he was begging them to wipe out all the Jews lest they move to Israel, but he was actually the father of Palestinian nationalism. He was the mentor of Yasser Arafat. This is not just another anti-Semite. He was a powerful individual whose effect is still being felt today.
Very much so. According to some sources, he's also not just a mentor of Yasser Arafat, he's also family. I mean, his mother, I forgot her first name, but she was a Husseini from the extended Husseini family, which is a well-known family. But a piece of work, and all I can say is the day that everything opens up, and at the moment, none of the apartments are being sold because the Jewish concerns behind the whole project are trying at the moment to make it into 56 apartments. There was talk about trying to change the zoning to 70 apartments. At the moment, 28 have been completed, none of them to be sold. We're trying to get it up to 56. I'm not sure what's happening with the 70. It's on the main road. It's a beautiful area in the heart of Jerusalem. And also to know the fact that there's going to be Jews living where 78 Jewish doctors and nurses were massacred by Arabs in 48 is also very symbolic. And the British, by the way, who were in that building at the time, the Scottish regiment and under the British were in that building a few hundred meters when the massacre was taking, and it took them 8 hours, according to every source, to decide to finally succumb. By that time, 78 were massacred. That's why there's a street named Rehov Ha'ayin Chet of the 78 that were massacred.
If I can, I want to. Dan is just a font of knowledge, a font of wisdom, and he is really you are, dude. He gives us information, and I want to put it in a little bit of context. Those 78 nurses and doctors were murdered. It was after the War of Independence or during?
April the 13th, 1948.
Okay. And the reason why they were murdered is Jerusalem, Mount Scopus was separated and from the rest of Jerusalem. So they had to travel through this enemy territory to get there. That area of the city is hugely strategic. And I think even to this day, if you put a hostile neighborhood in the middle of Jerusalem, you're establishing facts on the ground, and you're establishing a bad reality. And that bad reality is what we're being faced with today. And it's also, I'm sorry, to tell me that as a Jew, I can't live in a certain area of the world because I'm a Jew. I thought as a society we moved past that, but apparently we haven't.
The point that you've just made is so important because I believe that the left wing in Israel and the world should be jumping up and down about the decrees that a Muslim who sells to a Jew, a Muslim Arab who sells to a Jew is killed, and a middleman is allowed to be tortured. Could you imagine anywhere in the world where if you sold to, for example, a Maori in New Zealand, you sold to a Puerto Rican in America, that you'd be killed? That wouldn't last 24 hours, but it's an official fatwa, an edict in the Muslim world. There are today Muslim Arabs living, over 4,000 living in Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So why shouldn't a Jew be able to buy and live quietly in any neighborhood, whether it be the old Yemenite village of Silwan, where we have 23 families under fire every day? Every Jew has the right to be able to buy, to live, and live in peace quietly in any neighborhood in Jerusalem. To say that an area should be Yud and Rhein free of Jews is exactly what the Nazis said. So disallowing Jews to live in certain areas is something that we cannot accept. There are Arabs who are willing to sell. We find there's no shortage of Arabs ready to sell, of course, notwithstanding the pressures. And we find Jews in Israel around the world who are willing to and interested in to buy and then ultimately add these families to all these neighborhoods. The Yemenite village is probably the most hostile of all those areas, but I don't know if we've got time to talk about the Yemenite village today.
But we understand that there's the Palestinian Authority has been making its way inside of Jerusalem. Recently, there's been There's been articles about in Ataret neighborhood that the Israeli government has allowed Israeli armed police to come in to parts of Jerusalem. And you mentioned to me offline that there is an idea that 50 apartments in East Jerusalem will be granted by the Palestinian Authority?
Yes, in addition to the Turkish and Jordanian and all these various multi-million-dollar funds that are out there, strengthening Arab roots, I learned it off by heart. We're strengthening Arab roots in the heart of East Jerusalem to divide the city. It's more or less the reverse of what we're trying to do to add Jewish life. And now the PA is offering funds to 50 people per year, 50 houses in East Jerusalem that needs money for renovations. All of this is all over the struggle over every centimeter. It's all over sovereignty. It's all about sovereignty. It's the same thing about in relation to the polling booths, about they want to have polling booths in the middle of East Jerusalem. You want to vote for the PA, go to Ramallah, join your brethren and vote. But in the heart of East Jerusalem, united Jerusalem, unheard of. So,
and this is the same Palestinian Authority that claims not to have funds to feed their own population. So
correct.
Clearly they have the funds when it's necessary.
Rashida Tlaib, she went, oh, the Israeli government is not vaccinating the Jews. And the Israeli authorities not vaccinating the Arabs. And the Israeli officials turned around and said, we are. And not only that, if the Palestinian Authority has money to pay for terrorism and all these other horrible things, shouldn't they have money to take care of their own people? I also want to point out, you mentioned the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. You called it, and I would like very much to learn from you to call it not the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, but the Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood. The reason I think that's more proper and fitting is originally it was known as the tomb of Shimon HaTzadik, who was one of the last members of the Sanhedrin, the Great Assembly, his tomb was there. It was a place where Jews went to on
his tomb is still there.
His tomb is still there, and it was purchased by a French Jew in 1876, and dozens of Jewish families lived there. And that's another point that I want to bring about Daniel and Ataret Kohanim, is that one of the major fake news points that's raised about them is they're presented as if they're going in and stealing or taking Arab properties, which could not be further from the truth. It's
right. You've touched on a very, very important point, and that is the way things are presented in the world. Unfortunately, neighborhoods like that, we keep on talking in terms of Sheikh Jarrah, and then the world thinks it's Sheikh Jarrah without realizing that before there were Arabs there, it was a Jewish neighborhood. The same story, more famous, is actually Silwan. Before there was a single Arab living in Silwan, remember, there was nothing outside the city walls till 1860. Nothing. There were no even Arabs today. They lie through the teeth, and they claim to be there for hundreds of years. There was nothing outside the walls till 1860. The first people that were there were Yemenite Jews, later Sephardi Jews also, from 1882 onwards, called the Yemenite village, Kfar HaTemanim or Kfar HaShiloach, Yemenite village in the Shiloach. Today, it's become known as Silwan. So when people think in terms of Silwan, what are the Jews doing in Silwan? That's why today the courts, thank God, are recognizing. It started with the synagogue, where they recognized that it was part of a sanctified trust. And there's tens of other buildings, hundreds of illegal Arab squatters living in Jewish homes. Why shouldn't a Jew be able to move back to that area? It's just mind-boggling. Thank God today there are 23 families. There's a huge story unfolding there. The synagogue is, thank God, back in Jewish hands. It was hidden behind all this illegal Arab building. And a few years ago, it was deemed by the Supreme Court to be a synagogue, part of the sanctified trust. And today we're trying to restore to its previous course. So words are very important. Judean Samaria
Absolutely.
Versus West
I may be going out on a limb here, but every time there's a story involving Ateret Kohanim, and I do a minimal amount of research, and every single time the story comes out something like this. It's presented as, oh, they're going in, they're stealing Arab land. Then I do a little research. They actually are not. They bought it, And the Arab can't say that he sold it, because if he says he sold it, the Palestinian Authority will come along and either torture him or kill him or something like that. So and you actually, I give you a lot of credit. Ataret Kohanim goes to amazing lengths to try to protect the people who deal with them.
You remember last year there was a middleman, just a middleman, who was allegedly involved with Ateret Kohanim. He was hung upside down in Ramallah. He was put in a box. He was beaten. He had water and sewage dripped on him. He had his eyes damaged, and only because he was an American citizen did we manage to speak to various people in the American government.
Right.
And the American government put pressure on the PA. It's just phenomenal. You know,
and I'll be speaking out of class here, but Daniel would not let the story be published, and would not until he was absolutely sure that the man who was being targeted by the Palestinian Authority would be safe. And as soon as you knew he was safe, then you said, okay, now we can talk about it. People do not understand that. So the story goes, they stole the land. Oh no, I'm sorry. Well, they actually bought it. Oh no, well, actually they bought it, and the Arabs who say they owned it stole it from the original Jewish. That happened time after time.
Tell you something now that you probably have never heard, but you're hearing it from me now, probably for the very first time. As the executive director of Ateret Kohanim, I can tell you 100%, that in the 40 years that Ateret Kohanim has been acting, there's only been one situation where the Arab did not get money. In every other situation, an Arab is willingly selling, and there is some Jew in the world or in Israel who is buying, and we're facilitating the acquisition. One situation in 40 years where no money changed hands, and the Arabs know it. And that was recently the synagogue in the Yemenite village, where they didn't want to take money, and it was forced to go to the Supreme Court, which, by the way, opened up a very interesting saga, which I can't talk about, in relation to the sanctified trust and what's unfolding there. There are some things that I'm not at liberty to talk about, like the hotels at the Jaffa Gate, which is another interesting story relating to the Greek Orthodox Church.
That's another story that you just scrape a little at the surface, and you find out how many lies are being perpetuated in the media.
So when they say it's Arab stolen land, it's not really Arab. It's not really stolen. It reminds me of when I was studying a history class in grad school, and we were taught that the Holy Roman Empire was not Holy Roman or Empire. But yeah, it's unfortunately there's a lot of fake news out there.
So I want to emphasize, here we have Daniel Luria. He's giving us the straight deal. Whenever you hear stories about a Jewish organization going in and stealing Arab properties, always know you have to investigate that, even the tiniest bit. And I'm not saying it's always that way, though. Every time I've looked into it, that's been the case. Every single time. And there are cases that just sound one way, and you dig a little bit of a digging, and what it really turns out is the land was bought, the Arab can't say he sold it, and it was originally Jewish, and it got stolen. Here in the case of Shimon Tzadik, there's also the bigger, in addition, and similarly, holy sites all of a sudden become Muslim sites. You have the Mosque of Nabi Samuel, Navi Shmuel Navi. These are Jewish sites. And Shmuel Tzadik, it's a Jewish site that Jews are not allowed to go to. And it's straight up anti-Semitism. And I really appreciate the work that Ataret Kohanim does. But you have to understand that Daniel, his work is kind of like they say, when two porcupines slow dance, how do they do it? Very carefully. Okay. Daniel's work is really, he's trying to protect the Arabs who are selling, and they cannot say the truth. And for clear and obvious reasons, they do get killed by the Palestinian Authority if they sell lands to properties to Jews.
But thank God, I don't want to paint a situation, God forbid, that the Arabs aren't being killed. The fact that there is a fatwa is a disgrace and unethical, and the left wing should be jumping up down more than anything else. But there's a lot of hypocrisy there.
Right.
Arabs haven't been killed dealing with Ateret Kohanim. As far as I know, there's been one Arab.
Well, you go to
One
such
Arab
great
who's been
lengths.
working with
but
Ataret Kohanim, one Arab over 40 years that was shot at many, many years ago. He had 5 bullet holes in his chest, as it worked out, and he survived because 7 years beforehand, he received a Psalms book from the head of the organization that by chance was in his body on the night that he was shot. And it ended up being, it's an amazing story, so I'm telling you very quickly, that basically the bullet that was meant to have gone through his heart and killed him on the spot, one of the 5 bullets in his upper torso, didn't penetrate. The doctors couldn't believe it, and they take out the Psalms book, which is framed, and we've got the book that it stopped at a certain sentence inside the Psalms that only partially penetrated this Psalms book, and or Tehillim, and it came to the sentence that says, "My heart and my flesh will rejoice to a living God." That is the sentence that a bullet partially reached in a Psalms book that an Arab happened to have on his body 8 years after he was given it on the night that he was shot at by other Arabs, because they found out that he was helping Ataret Kohanim bring Jewish life back to Jerusalem. He's the only person that was shot, and he survived. So it can happen. It's easily done. Today, we obviously want the Jewish world and those that have got Jerusalem in their veins to be involved in the organization as much as possible, whether it be at the level of acquisitions or whether it be for the gamut of projects that are part of the organization. But people can be in touch with me if they want at dljerusalem@gmail.com. I saw that someone put up on the site there our internet site, ataretkohanim.org. So, yeah, there's a lot to be done. I can't, by the way, take credit for the Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood. It's actually not under our auspices. Ateret Kohanim has been involved in the Old City, Malon Shefer, the Shefer Hotel, Mount of Olives neighborhood, the Old Yemenite Village in Kidmat Zion. But credit where credit is due, there's a few organizations looking after the Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood, Simon the Just neighborhood in their own way.
What happens to Arabs that sell their properties to Jews that are concerned about this fatwa that you mentioned earlier? They feel that they're in danger. Is there any protection for them? Are they able to leave to a place where they would be protected afterwards?
I have to be very careful what I say because, obviously I'm not going to incriminate any particular building or any Arab or whatever it may be over the last 40 odd years. All I can say is that Arabs have been protected. Have there been some that have maybe gone overseas? Maybe yes. Have there been court cases against Ateret Kohanim, even though the Arabs have had money? Maybe yes. There's no shortage of things that can be done, including using middlemen. I will say that there was one story many years ago where the condition of sale was that no Jew was meant to move into the acquisition for 7 years. Now, he obviously didn't get paid straight away. Many Arabs could have been living in the building. Some Arabs were known, some Arabs not known. And eventually, 7 years later, the Jews moved in. Who is going to connect it to that very first Arab many, many years ago who may have sold it? So there's many things that are done. It's not straightforward. It is not like moving from Ramot to Rehavia or vice versa. This is a different story. It's a real estate, ideological real estate with a twist, but it is possible. And like I said, there is no shortage of Arabs ready to sell. Today, the issue is basically having the relevant and necessary funds, investment funds and otherwise, to do what is necessary. So if in this way, this talk can help, and who knows who's listening,
God will.
those that want to be involved, there are ways to contact me to help them do what is necessary to keep Jerusalem in Jewish hands.
What about the government? Sorry, Elio. What about the government support? What about the Israeli police? Are they enforcing the laws? Are they catching these people that are threatening the Arabs that have sold their property?
That's a lot more difficult because the threat is very esoteric. It's like this. It's a decree. It's a very real decree. Now, could the PA be sued in some world forum? Or could some other higher Muslim authority be sued for something so anti-Semitic or immoral or unethical? Maybe yes, but it's beyond my involvement. So I'm not sure what could be done at that level. Although surely there are things that could be done because they're stopping other Arabs freely to sell. The other question about what are the authorities, are they involved, are they doing things, maybe not so much in relation to that regards, but authorities are turning up to these places. And what do I mean by that? It's once again, it's not to do with the decrees. It has to do with sovereignty. 20 years ago, not one municipal inspector would have walked around Silwan, the old Yemenite village of Shiloah. Not one. Not one policeman, not one border patrol policeman, not one shekel probably would have been invested to make parks and gardens or pathways or guardrails. Nothing. What we do as a result of Jewish life going back to that area, we then work with more moderate Arabs who won't speak like I am to you publicly and show their faces, but work with them to bring the municipality in there, to bring investment, to bring government money, to bring police, the border patrol police, and we are effectively slapping sovereignty wherever we go. And sovereignty may be an Eged bus that was brought to Malé Azeitim, an Eged bus going to Kidmat Zion, municipality making a new road and guardrails and lighting. That
trash collection.
All of that is very important, because if you don't invest, if you don't act like a sovereign body, you effectively divide the city. If you want to show that you're the balabait, you're someone in charge, then act like one. And unfortunately, there's been too many people, too many mayors, too many institutions, too many government bodies that have spoken high and mighty about United Jerusalem, but haven't done zip to keeping it really in Jerusalem.
And I suspect that the United Nations has not had any emergency sessions of the Security Council in order to condemn these attacks on the Arabs that sell the properties.
I think they, if I'm not mistaken, I think the UN only get together to vote against Israel, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I remember the first time you told me about this, Daniel. At first, my reaction was as a Jew saying, what, you mean I can't buy property because I'm a Jew, which is horribly anti-Semitic? And then I thought, you know, I just recently, I moved to the Golan about 8 years ago. I had a house, I sold it, I made a profit, and then I moved to the Golan. And I'm thinking, my gosh, I worked with Arabs, these poor men. They're fathers and husbands, and they have to look at their family and say, we can't move because I can't sell our major investment is in our house, and I can't sell it. You're telling these Arabs that you're ruining their lives. And also, as you pointed out, the Arab neighborhoods, I think there's actually a vested interest by the Palestinian Authority to keep them oppressed, to keep them in bad situations and bad conditions. And when the Jews move in, things start getting better. That's been the story of Israel since the outset. And you know, I mean, it's not your main mission to improve the lives of the Arabs, but in a
it is definitely part of what we're doing, because at the end of the day,
it's definitely a big result.
No, it doesn't bother me who my next door neighbor is, so long as he's prepared to live in peace, live in coexistence, live under Jewish Israeli sovereignty. If someone wants to live in a Jewish state for Jewish people with Jewish values and a Jewish whatever, he wants to live there quietly, ahlan mas'alan. In fact, there's no shortage of Arabs that actually say exactly that. They were asked, I think there were 3,000, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 Arabs in Jerusalem asked 5 years ago who they preferred to be under, the PA, Hamas, or Jewish Israeli sovereignty. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, 63 or 65% of the Arabs in Jerusalem prefer to be under Israeli sovereignty. Life is good under the Jews. All you have to do is go to the Hadassah hospital, go to the Hebrew University, see who are the doctors, the dentists, the nurses, the patients, everything, the students, the teachers, the lecturers. It can work only under Jewish sovereignty. So we have to show strength of conviction. We have to not just talk about United Jerusalem, but actually do something about it. And we're doing what we can to try and make sure that there's enough Jewish facts on the ground and Jewish presence in the Holy Basin, the old city and the area around.
As they were building the security barrier, this became very obvious when people that were living right on that area had a choice whether they wanted to be on the side of the Palestinian Authority or on the Israeli side. You see that many of them all of a sudden started moving over to the Israeli side because they chose which side they would be best to live under. I have another question about Israeli sovereignty and Israeli judiciary specifically. I would suspect that if you went to any court almost in the world and you came in with the claim that there is a property that has been sold, and the claimant comes in and says, if I only knew that I was selling to a Jew, then I wouldn't have sold that property. In any other court in the world, they probably would laugh that out of the court. They would throw it out immediately. Here in Israel, it seems that is a claim that is accepted by the courts here. Am I wrong?
I can't talk about anything specific and about what happens in the courts in relation to the sale or not sale of the house, because there are some things that may be in the courts now. There are, which I know. So I'd rather, I apologize.
I'm not asking about specifics. I'm asking whether that type of claim seems to me as a ridiculous claim that would be thrown out of any other court in the world. If you went in the United States to a court and said, if I only knew that I was selling to a Jew, I wouldn't have sold the property, that would not be an acceptable claim.
I don't think anyone's claiming that. No one is claiming that in the courts. If it does go to court, it may be that that this is not fair. I was cheated. I've got the paperwork. Why are the Jews moving in? It's really mine. It's not theirs, even though they may have quietly got some money. No one's claiming that type of claim that you said. At the moment, there are a number of things in the court, mainly in the Shiloach area, that all center around the synagogue and the sanctified trust because of the ruling of the synagogue. But like I said,
can you just explain to the audience, because most people are not familiar with this concept of sanctified trusts, what that means and what the history is and how that applies today in Jerusalem?
Right outside the old city, opposite the city of David, is a very, very special area with a magnificent view. I mean, I like going there just to look around and see where King David walked. It's berserk. You literally see the whole of the city of David. You're looking back to the Temple Mount. Yemenite Jews first came there in 1882. There were 144 Yemenite families at the very least. Now, when they came and they lived there initially, there were some people that bought land, and many of the original Yemenites were very poor. So what happened was there was a trust that was set up. There was a fund that was set up that bought land, and some of the property wasn't for individuals. It was more communal property looked after by the community. It was land that was owned by a Jewish guy called Boaz Abavli. He sold it or gave it to help create some of this Yemenite village. And some of the village was private homes, but some of it was communal property looking after the poor. There was the ritual bath. There was the medical center. There was the yeshiva. There was the 3 or actually 4 synagogues. There was a synagogue complex. All of that's the equivalent today of about 25 buildings in a very large area of 5,000 square meters. That was a sanctified trust, community owned by the Yemenite community.
We're talking under the Ottoman Turkish reign, correct?
From 1882, correct. It's recognized today. There is no question. There's never a question actually about the Jewish ownership, whether it be the old city, the Mount of Olives, Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood, and even here in the Olives. No one is questioning the fact that it's Jewish owned, that it's a sanctified trust or private Yemenite or private Sephardim that may be owned it. No one questions that. What the Arabs are challenging is, then what's it got to do with today? We're here today. We've been here for 70 years. And they make various claims. People forget, of course, even they have forgotten that they drove the Jews out in 1937, 38. The British have got a lot to answer for.
That's kind of a euphemism, if you'll pardon me, saying they drove them out. They tried to kill them. And the British
there were many that were killed. You should know that last week, the son of one of the guys that lived there was a famous guy called Shlomo Madmuni. After we were kicked out in August of 1938, and the British promised that the Jewish refugees could return shortly to their homes, a British promise that it's a Jewish neighborhood and that the Jews are refugees. Today they talk about just the Arabs and the Arab neighborhoods, but that's the typical British hypocrisy and the things they did. They didn't protect the Jews. They forcibly evicted the last 35 families in August, and in January, 6 months later, a guy called Shlomo Madmuni goes back to retrieve one of the Sefer Torah that was there still in the neighborhood that tried to get it out. And he goes back into the neighborhood. He walks into the neighborhood, and just in the valley before he goes in, which is at the end of Gay Ben Hinnom, right at the edge of the neighborhood, he's murdered. Last week, 82 years later, his son comes back and says Kaddish in the shul that we've got back in our hands after 82 years. After Shlomo Madmuni tries it, but he came back. He's an older man today, even the son. walked in with a walking stick, came into the synagogue, unveiled the plaque for his father, and came into the same synagogue that his father tried to get to bring out a Sefer Torah after the Arabs had desecrated it, burnt it, left feces there, and there's even pictures to show what they did. Rechav Ze'evi's father was standing in the Beit Knesset a year later, and he complained to the British authorities, what did you do? Where were you? Why didn't you stop this? Anyway, the British got a lot to answer for, but we're back in the neighborhood today with 23 families. Now we're trying to restore the whole of the synagogue. And of course, we've got some very special donors around the world, primarily from Australia and America, a very special donor in America, in Australia, who is going to help restore tremendously the Yemen region, notwithstanding the fact that Ir Amin, this left-wing group who has lost the plot in relation to work with Arabs, they've forgotten their own Jewish roots, are so anti any Jewish life here, are trying to stop the government from investing money, putting money to restore a heritage site. It's just unbelievable. The government sees it as a heritage site. They want to put money, and Ir Amin, worse than some of the Arabs, the violent Arabs that are there, who have attacked the families non-stop for the years that we've been there, trying to stop the government from investing in a Jewish heritage site.
You know, these groups, they try to pass themselves off as humanitarian. And the question is, are you pro-Palestinian or are you anti-Jewish? If you're only anti-Jewish, you're not humanitarian. And they're not working for the benefit. They're not bringing any benefits to the Arab communities. I remember, Josh, wasn't there a case, I'm not sure if you were involved with this, Daniel, but I think it was an Arab who was accused of selling land to Jews, and then they wouldn't let him be buried in a Muslim cemetery, and the chief rabbis permitted him to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Is that am I misremembering?
You've got the story right.
Right. Okay. Were you involved? You weren't involved in that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Daniel,
cannot
like
confirm
I said,
or deny that accusation.
Porcupine slow dancing, but that's how absurd it gets. It's not even. I mean, after the poor guy died, I think he died in a car accident, and they would not let him be buried in a Muslim cemetery, and the family was like, "What do we do with our loved one? You know, he has to be buried." And I was very proud.
Where's Ir Amin? Where's Ir Amin? Where are these?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Anyway, where are these people? Where are they when an Arab gets accused of selling his house to try to feed his family? Where are they? As a matter of fact, there's a lot of work.
Eliyahu, there's a lot of work to be done, but I've actually, I must say that I do actually have to finish off now. If it's okay, I apologize.
What happened? When I finally get you cornered, I want you forever. I think what you're doing is changing the world. It's amazing.
Well, let's put it this way: I'm a very small cog, but in a very, very important wheel, trying to redeem Jerusalem. So I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to speak about the Mufti's house. That's going to be a Jewish center, about the Yemenite village, and about the revival of Jewish life. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. You're absolutely the best. Stay strong. We're with you. God bless you. And everyone else.